How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. It sounds like we have some kind of a visual issue, and as we troubleshoot that, I welcome you to the Wednesday of the ProveIt session, from which we are broadcasting live from the booth right on the exhibit floor. And so, as we look at the video, we do have a couple of topics that I specifically prepared and want to cover as a result of the broadcast. And give us just a moment as we maybe review.
Okay. Oh, it might be a camera input issue, Vlad. We are live over on this one. Hey, everyone. Let us know if you can see and or hear us in the chat.
Okay. So it seems like we have everything clear on the audio side. It seems like the
Okay.
video maybe on one of the cameras is not okay. So I think we'll just have to use one of the feeds.
Keep going, Vlad.
Yes. All right. So there's a couple of things. So first of all, if you're unfamiliar with ProveIt, it is a conference that started last year in 2025. This is the second iteration, and the entire premise of the conference is to showcase solutions as they would be used on the plant floor. So, in a typical environment, you have vendors creating a demo or a simulated environment. In this case, they have three distinct factories on which Dave and I have already had several conversations and demonstrations, but they are building a practical solution that addresses the problems of one, two, or three of those factories. And so thus far, Dave and I have been to multiple sessions. We have emceed a couple of sessions on stage. We have had multiple conversations with the vendors. And as we close out day 3 of the exhibit, we definitely want to share some of our thoughts on the different concepts of ProveIt, different vendors, different solutions. And so, as we finalize some of this little glitches, I want to start with a recap of day 1 through 3. And so, like I've mentioned a little bit on the format. To expand on that, besides the showcases or the ProveIt sessions, there's also an exhibit hall, and the intent is that after you see the ProveIt session, you can come down, you can speak with the vendor, get a little bit more details, not only on their solution but also on the general sense of their application, as well as the portfolio, answer some of the questions. And Walker had created a framework. So basically, if you were one of the end users and you were looking at some of the solutions that the vendor have been presenting, you probably wanted to select 3 to 5 different sessions that you would attend. You would come down to the exhibit floor, look at the solution in a lot more depth, then attend the workshop where the vendor would showcase a more advanced application. Again, I haven't had a chance to attend any of the workshops yet, but I have heard very positive feedback as the workshop provided a much more hands-on experience. And so for me, day 1 through 3, exceptionally packed. Like I said, a lot of different conversations with end users, with vendors, with the exhibitors, of course. So I think it has been absolutely fantastic. So in terms of the engagements, right? So Dave and I, as I said, obviously talked to a lot of the vendors. We have emceed several sessions. So personally, I had the TatSoft, I had Opto 22, and just not too long ago, I emceed for Portainer. And so the concept there, as well as the MC, and in the last year, it was Jeff Winter as well as Amy Williams. In this case, Dave and I, as well as Remus Pop, were also coming on stage. But the goal of the MC is to validate the execution for the vendor. And so basically, it's asking some of the tougher questions. It is following up on the questions if they haven't been answering, and it is to bring up some of the Q&A from the audience to a vendor, in many cases that would be uncomfortable to answer in a public setting. And so my experience has been really good on that side because I have worked with a lot of those solutions, but I did want to bring Dave in as he basically fixed whatever we were experiencing at the beginning of the stream, and maybe get his feedback on day Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Absolutely. So last year, Vlad, I don't know if you said it, we had 3 days of ProveIt. And we're 3 days in, and it seems like we are just getting started. So it has been absolutely fantastic. There are more vendors here. There are, I think, 51 here this year. I think we had 30 something, maybe 40 last year. So very happy to have the additional groups of vendors come in. They've been very interesting presentations. I think some, anywhere you go, there are going to be some presentations that are better and worse than others. I think Walker gave a really great opening address, talking a bit about the history and why ProveIt and moving to the next generation. And Jeff Winter gave an absolutely fantastic opening keynote, very much kind of touching into the executive and end user space. And so Jeff, as he always does, did an absolutely fantastic job. And Jeff absolutely did a fantastic job. It's been so busy. This is now our second stream. We had Colby on earlier this week on Monday, and that was an awesome conversation. And between going and watching sessions and going and talking to vendors down here and emceeing a couple of sessions on Tuesday myself, I also haven't got to any workshops. I don't know if I'm going to get to workshops. I would love to, but the schedule is already fairly booked. I have had a number of really nice conversations with listeners and hopefully new listeners, and getting to meet and re-meet a bunch of additional people. So I had a couple of sessions that I emceed yesterday, and I saw a couple that we had today. I guess, did you have any favorite sessions? I have a couple that I really particularly liked outside of the title sponsors, but did you have any particularly favorite sessions?
I will be honest, I spent a lot of time preparing for emceeing the sessions, as well as speaking quite extensively with the vendors at the exhibits. So I have missed quite a few sessions. As the current schedule stands, I really enjoyed what Maintain Access presented, because the solution was very easy to understand. It wasn't particularly technical and highly detailed as some of the others, so it was very easy to absorb from an audience standpoint. As I've mentioned previously on the podcast, I have worked in maintenance, so I definitely resonate with what they're doing, and I thought it was very easily digestible. I missed a couple of sessions that I would have liked to see, and that is inductive, as well as I know the LSI, 4IR, and Twin Thread group. But yes, there's a couple of presentations I would like to catch up on.
Absolutely. So I think that both of the title sponsors, both Litmus and Inductive, had good presentations. On the Litmus side, and I don't know if you were there because we somehow haven't sat next to each other at all so far this week, which is very different than a normal conference. But on the Litmus side, I really liked what Dave McMorrin, their field CTO, he was showing one of the tools, and he's like, this tool is made by sales guys, so it's not for sale. And then as soon as you say, hey, you can't have this thing, everyone wants the thing. And I think there were 6 questions as to, can we have this? And so I think Vish and Parth and the No Sleep crew over on the Litmus team have some more work to do, which is their normal everyday life. I really liked Travis and Kevin and Arlen on the inductive side, going out, and they deployed 14 sites, but they deployed not just production, they employed dev and test and production. So 3 times 14-ish ignition gateways, and they did it in 3-ish minutes, maybe less. Time warps while you're in the trade show, and it was very fast. And so they always do a good job. They set a spectacularly high bar for themselves, and they have absolutely crushed that spectacularly high bar. We're going to have them on March 4th, Wednesday, normal time, in order to go do a deep dive into that conversation. I'm happy. It's kind of exciting to see both Kevin and Travis on stage doing a build for the first time since the Versus build-a-thons that they were doing. So I was particularly happy to see that. To your point, we just got out of the 4IR LSI Twin Thread, and I thought they did a fantastic job. I am super biased as to the fact that I think they did a fantastic job, and I knew it was coming, but I thought that they did a fantastic job from beginning to end, going, and the 3 groups coming together in order to go visualize multiple factories of data. I will say one thing that they did really well, that some other groups haven't done very well. So for the listeners at home, every group is supposed to be able to answer 4 questions. What problem did you solve? How did you solve it? How long did you take? And how much did it cost? And last year, there were some uncomfortable conversations with people who struggled to articulate how much something costs. And this year, there may or may not still be problems to articulate how much something costs. But I think that they did a fantastic job, not just saying, hey, we took, 100 hours of development and 20 hours of modeling and 30 hours of something else and 25 or 30 hours of deployment on the factory stack side. So I think they did a fantastic job, and I really want to call them out to thank them for doing that. I heard only positive feedback from people who were in that session. And generally speaking, I've heard mostly positive feedback from people in that session. We've had some struggles with a couple of different groups kind of across it who are just kind of PowerPoint, or perhaps some people who are less than happy because there are a bunch of video demos and we're not going and building it live. Almost every group built it live last year. I think that was particularly special. You have a number of groups who have gone and videoed some of that demo, and I honestly understand this. As I've told all the groups that I've talked to, Vlad, at the very least, I would video record it. So if and when there is an issue, you have a video of the demo and you just don't stand up there twiddling your thumbs for the entirety of the time. So yeah. I thought that was fantastic. Let's see. Another group that I was emceeing for that I like to call it is the Tillit folks. So Tillit is the platform. Roema. I'm never going to get that name right. Roema is the name of the company. And they did a really good job. I really liked, so they took SOPs. They broke those SOPs down for Enterprise B, which is a bottling facility. So they've done a lot of wine. And so there's a lot of clean in place. There's a lot of very specific tasks. There's some non-conformance, and they were able to auto-generate that from within the platform. And one of the cool things that they did, because we've seen a lot of AI chatbots, but one of the cool things that they did is as you're going through those processes, they had an LLM down there in the corner in order to go articulate, hey, if you're having a problem with X thing, go look at Y thing, or it like popped up on a manager screen. Hey, there was an issue with this, maybe go try these things to go solve the issue. So I like that. I feel like they did a fantastic job all the way around. And I feel like if I'm there and you do a fantastic job, I'm going to shamelessly plug you. Another group that I caught the back end of was Itanta. I was impressed with what they were doing. I just caught the back end of it before I was going up on stage. It looked very impressive. And if I can just finish out, and apparently it's my turn for monologuing. Vlad got the monologuing while I was trying to fix some of the cameras, and now I'm getting my initial monologue in. There are lots of really great bronze sponsors down here. So groups that are not presenting on stage, but there are a bunch of really great bronze sponsors who did a fantastic job. And so if you are here at ProveIt watching the show, I 100% would suggest and recommend that you guys go check out the bronze sponsors.
And let me maybe add some comments on that side, right? Because I took some notes when it comes to presenting within the ProveIt sessions, but also creating a booth that makes sense. And I do have some thoughts as to what it takes, I believe, to deliver something exceptional for the community. And I think that conversation generally starts with the business strategy of the company, right? Because ultimately, we have a broad range and spectrum, I would say, of solutions, some of which are hardware focused, some of which are software, some of which are at the SCADA and control system layer, some of which are at the MES or analytics layer, some of which are going to be more data connecting, data processing, data storage. And so you need to be cognizant of whom you're pitching your solution, both at the booth, but I would argue at the booth, you can obviously get that context of the person you're speaking with. But as you're doing the presentation, there's going to be a very broad audience sitting on those chairs. And I have had multiple conversations, even with end users, that would bring in not only their operators and engineers, but all the way up to their director and VP level roles. And so, of course, if your presentation is maybe skewed towards one side or the other, you may lose the attention of the other side. And so what I have seen in a general sense is that ProveIt is aimed more at practitioners. So even those that have been in director and VP roles that I have spoken to still understand the struggles of the plant floor, still want to improve the factories. So if you're coming in with just a pure slide deck where you're showing them PowerPoint after PowerPoint and you're maybe not showing the actual application, I do believe there's definitely some credibility lost on that front.
Mhm.
Now, the second item is, despite being more technical, that doesn't mean that the person necessarily understands your application, and they may have absolutely no knowledge of who you are. So if you don't put in context the actual business problem that you're capable of solving, it becomes sometimes very difficult to get that context within the short time frame of the session. And of course, if that message doesn't land as you start to demo, the conversation may not even happen at the booth downstairs. So that is an opportunity lost. So my opinion is, figure out if you are going to be selling to executives or you're going to be selling to the plant floor. Create a message that resonates on either side. Make sure that you are articulating a very clear, and I would argue simple, business solution. I have seen groups that try to simply do too much, right? So for
Yeah.
me, less is definitely more, and showcase something that wows the audience, right? So we have seen basically groups query Cloud Code
Mhm.
live and allow you to build an actual demo of a SCADA system
Yep.
live on stage. And of course, there might be some issues, there might be some shortcomings. We all understand the hallucinations that AI may encounter. We understand that there's network problems,
Mhm.
but you will be forgiven for those if you present something very compelling, right? Of course, and that's not to say if you're just going to put up a button or make something simple, you're not going to be you're going to be given the same type of credit. But it is definitely very interesting how far the envelope was pushed by certain groups. And as they've said,
Yeah.
of course, prepare something in the background that you can play if there are technical issues. Again, that could be because of your fault or could be because of the venue or anything of that nature.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with I would agree with that. It is interesting because last year I felt like there were a lot of really raw presentations, and I feel like the presentations continue to get better and better as the days went on. I think lots of people rebuilt their presentations last year after seeing some of the initial spots, and I would say all of the Prove It sessions at ICC were spectacular. All the ones that I went into were spectacular. And so it's been interesting to go see how we have a wider range of presentations. Some of them are exceptionally polished. Some of them are less polished than I would have expected.
Mhm.
I think a lot of it has to do with the groups and the people presenting. It's a very constrained time, right? You've got 30 minutes. There's an intro. They have a video. Some groups have done a really good job with their intro video of introducing themselves and what they're planning to do. Some groups have done a less good job introducing themselves and what they're going to do, and then kind of have to dig out from that. So to me, it's interesting, kind of going back and forth. I would agree with all of your statements as to a good presentation. I know for me, when I go into these presentations, especially because they're very focused on problems, right? So when I go into the presentations, I really want someone who is like, this is the problem that I have solved, or this is the problem that I am solving. I told all of the groups that I'm emceeing for, all of the groups that I'm working with, that my preference is you define the problem that you're going to attack at the beginning, you go show that you've proved the problem, and then you re-articulate that problem at the end. The groups that I've seen that have done those things and done those things well, I feel all present better than going and jumping in and doing some stuff with whichever of the enterprises, and then from that point say, hey, this is what we did. So I agree. I think that the groups that articulate the problem and the business problem, I would say to your point, Vlad, there is a lot of AI. There's a lot of chatbots. I really appreciate like the groups of, hey, we've built Claude into what we're doing, and we can go build all of these visuals live on stage. Like that is a really cool. That is a risky concept, and I think that the riskiest of concepts are the best concepts. Are the ones that play out the best when you succeed. I feel, and so I was really happy to see a lot of that. I would say beyond the AI side, there are a couple of groups who I really appreciate that they're doing the foundational work. Are you cool if we talk about some other things, or we want to talk a little bit more about AI?
I wanted to close off, I guess, a little bit on the Prove It kind of like experience before we even move into the solution side.
Okay.
To be honest with you, so let me maybe like take a quick step back before we expand a bit more on AI and ask you maybe a question. Well, let me give some of my thoughts first
Okay.
before I pass it on to you on the MC experience.
Yep.
Right. So I think it's important to also reflect back as someone who is talking to some of these vendors
Mhm.
on stage, who's bringing some of those questions. And I think for me, it's a very, very interesting and different format that
Mhm.
you see in any other trade shows. And I've
Yeah.
I've gotten really good comments saying that you're asking questions coming from the industry as a practitioner. But I think beyond that, what really, or I guess like what I well, I guess let me take another step back, right? Let me give the format of what the MC experience has been for those that may not have seen any of the ProveIt sessions, right? So generally, Dave, Remus, Walker, Amy, or Jeff would give a brief intro of the solution. We would then play an intro video that the company has submitted. They would then have 30 minutes to answer those 4 key questions.
Mhm.
And our goal is first and foremost to make sure that they answer those 4 questions. And then afterwards, we bring in some of the Q&A.
Yep.
And so for me, that was, first of all, as the MC, super exciting, right? Because at the end of the day, they are to an extent are forced to answer those questions, whereas otherwise they may not be as transparent.
Mhm.
It also reveals how the team reacts to like very difficult, in my experience again, questions that may otherwise might not be brought in front of them. What was, I guess, like your experience on the emceeing side, Dave?
I think it's been interesting. I think it's been. I think it has been interesting. It's one of those things that, like a couple of the groups that I'm working with, I probably could have spent 15 hours with them, and they were very interested in thoughts and feedback. And then there are some other groups who were less interested in meeting, and you didn't have as much understanding as to what they were going to go show. So I have generally enjoyed it. For me, as we were like you and I were just discussing what we think makes a good ProveIt presentation. And I think you and I are generally aligned. We'd probably come up with different problems and how we would get there, but I think you and I would generally get to the same place. Some people present differently. And so, as I reflect as a human and as a manager of other engineers, right, it becomes the thought of, hey, I may go do my project, I may go present my project, I may go make my presentation in a particular way. But just because you're doing it in a way that is not my way doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. Would I do it a different way? Absolutely. But I have learned to allow people to kind of continue down that path. And so I have been doing my very best in all of these to allow people to kind of go show that personality, to go show the company flair and flavor, and to go present how they are going to present. It's not my goal to go up there and kind of interrupt people or move people unless we need to go get back on track. And it's always my goal of how can we help present what you guys are doing as well as possible.
Yep.
And so I always like to say, so I've had a couple of companies who work on Enterprise B, which is the multi-site. And then the 4IR team did Enterprise B and C that we had just talked about. And the inductive team did Enterprise B and C. And I think Litmus did both or all 3. And so it has been interesting to see, hey, we're going to go pick one enterprise. We're going to pick several enterprises. We're going to go pick, process CPG. On the Enterprise B side, we're going to go pick life sciences. So I always like to go ask the question and understand how what we've just shown, especially if it is in, process CPG, like, does it relate to discrete? Does it relate to life sciences? And the answers can be no, right? Like, I almost think that you want to go ask the questions until you get to a no. And if someone says, hey, we can do process CPG or we do all sorts of process and batch, and that is our sweet spot, but we don't want to get into discrete or we don't want to go get into life sciences, I think that's a fantastic question. Like, I am happy that groups and people are willing and able to go kind of down the path of this is what we're good at. We're going to go be good at the thing that we're good at. And so I really respect that. And I am happy to see the groups that do that. So I've been asking all of my groups as to how what they do relates to other industries. And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. And I personally think that's good. And then I have also been doing my very best to allow the audience to ask questions. Right. One of the things that I really loved last year when Jeff and Amy were emceeing was the fact that, they were there to make sure that we stayed on the rails. And as long as the company was on the rails, that was good. I think that a lot of companies this year learned, and I talked to everyone I could about, please have a slide answering those 4 questions, because, man, it's a lot easier to go see answers to those 4 questions with it up there. And if you can't articulate how much it costs, it's going to be a difficult conversation. So just put your $2,000 or put your $250,000 up there and own the fact that your solution costs money. So I would say for me, I've really appreciated all of the audience interaction when it comes to questions. Vlad, you and I could both monologue and or ask these guys 15 minutes of really deep questions. Yes. But I have withheld myself to 2 or 3 or 4 questions to allow everyone else to be able to go ahead and ask as well.
Yeah, and I think that, sometimes even on a regular Manufacturing Hub show, the comment that we get is, why didn't you press that person with a specific question? And I think it's also a balance to recognize, when you have a specific persona or a team or a group, what can they answer and what can't they answer, right? And that's not necessarily to say that they shouldn't answer the 4 questions that have been presented at ProveIt, but it's more so when the technology that they are presenting is dependent on the entire stack, and they may have used other tools to build out the solution. I believe that it's not necessarily honest to make them liable for a different component in that stack, right? So I think that there's so many variables in our ecosystem. Some vendors have hardware, some vendors are going to have software, some vendors, as I had mentioned, are going to operate just as a pure broker or data transformation solution. So if the question comes in from an audience that may not understand some of those nuances, obviously you want to bring it to their attention, but maybe it is saved for later when it relates to a different piece of technology and you as a practitioner are capable of filtering out some of those nuances. So I would say it is very difficult to make sure that everything stays on track, that you balance asking the right questions, but also things that the audience would be interested in, but also balancing the knowledge of the audience. So I'll give an example. I just finished emceeing Portainer, and Portainer is a solution which provides the application upon which other apps can be deployed. And so, of course, when the question came up of how do I deploy an existing instance of Ignition onto Portainer, well, obviously they provide the architecture and you can create all of that on Portainer, but it's very difficult to hold them liable to the fact that the configuration of the instance within the Ignition side of the application is going to be done correctly, right? So that's going to be a different question when we discuss that. And same goes for a lot of different solutions. If it's a group that provides the hardware and they've deployed, Ignition Edge, if there are some questions on that side, they're not going to be the right group, I would argue, to answer questions on that specific application. It would be the partner that they're utilizing to build out that solution.
I mean, I would say to some extent, yes, but also almost everyone here is leveraging Ignition in one way or another. And if you're a company that deploys containerized solutions, you should be able to walk through how you deploy a containerized solution for the probably single most popular form of software that groups are out here using.
Well, it's more the configuration of the underlying application, right? So they answer the question of how to deploy it, but then the configuration is really up to you, right?
I think that's a really good example of, we could go vibe code an entire solution in 2 hours or 6 weeks. But is that a solution that is acceptable to go launch to an enterprise client? I have seen none of those, since the invention of vibe coding several months ago. It's a really great proof of concept and you can go build it in 3 minutes, but similar to deploying Ignition in 3 minutes, there is some configuration, there are other things, there's cybersecurity, there's hardening, there's other items that one must think about in order to go be successful with that.
Yep.
And James on the 4IR side had said something very similar in regards to factory stack of, hey, we can go get a prototype spun up in 3 minutes or 7 minutes or something along that line. But if we want to move from prototype proof of concept phase into extended enterprise solutions and enterprise phase, then that is a different conversation. It takes more time and effort and more intention in order to be successful. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, and so look, if we transition to the AI conversation, maybe so. Obviously, you find all sorts of different conversations, all sorts of on the spectrum, I would say, in the conference. My current stance is that I believe things will get better, but I do believe it is still difficult to reliably deploy, as you mentioned, AI solutions to the production floor. Based on what I have been seeing, I'm almost putting AI in two categories when it comes to industrial solutions, right? So, what I mean by that is there is AI that is used to basically transform and analyze the underlying data, and then there is AI that is used to build out the solution, right? Let me give you an example of each one. So if you have a SCADA or an MES platform, well, there's different challenges and different ways to, again, leverage AI. So on the design side, right, so you have to spend engineering resources and ultimately capital to build out a cohesive set of screens that represent your plant, but also represent some of the areas maybe you want to pass through to other perhaps departments. So you can use AI in certain instances, right? There's a few demos that I've seen that are capable of doing so to build out a screen based on a prompt, to adjust the UI of the screen based on a prompt, to also tie in some of the data from the different sources and pass them to some of the others via prompt. So I would say like the design and sort of the architecture of the solution is one way to leverage AI. On the other side, it is then applying it to the data that is collected and stored within some of those solutions, right? And that could be your historian, it could just be your raw database, it could be even your broker, right? So it really depends where the data is landed, but ultimately AI can gain context of that data. Again, whether that's coming from the edge, it comes into the cloud platform. There's a lot of different options, but the point is two ways that I would categorize AI. What are your thoughts on that side, Dave?
I had an interesting conversation with some folks at lunch about AI and about what we're seeing and what they are deploying or trying to go create to deploy on site, and then kind of what we're seeing in general. And I had this kind of realization of how far we have come on industrial AI in the 1 year between conferences, right? So ProveIt 2025, Remus rolled out a chatbot and it just blew up, right? Like everyone was shocked. It was exceptionally amazing and innovative. And since that point, we've had vibe coding, we've had agentic AI, we've had MCP servers. We've come really, really far, especially on the consumer and prosumer side, as to how many of those solutions are necessarily ready to go be deployed on the plant floor. The majority of the ones that are actively ready to be deployed on the plant floor that I am currently seeing are more along the lines of LLMs, are more along the lines of machine learning, more along the lines of regression analysis that we've seen kind of time and time again. There are some really interesting AI solutions, specifically along the lines of like vision camera specific, and to a large extent, those have existed for several years. Since before OpenAI and ChatGPT kind of blew up the entire world. So there are certainly applications that you're seeing. It's just, as in with most things in manufacturing, it's going to take several years to get from the, hey, we're showing off all of these cool solutions here at ProveIt or here at another trade show versus, hey, we are going and rolling these out on the plant floor.
Yeah, and I would say, look, in my experience at least, I believe that it is not a vendor and solution problem. It is a gap between where the manufacturers are and where they need to be in order to leverage some of these solutions, right? Because at the end of the day, as we all should probably know at this point, The more context you give AI,
Mhm.
the better it will be at answering some of those questions. The
Yep.
better you train the models, the better it's going to be at answering some of those questions.
Absolutely.
And so, of course, that requires a pretty robust data layer,
Mhm.
which generally means that you need to be up to speed on your hardware, your
Mhm.
OT networks, your general applications that collect, store, present, and at least visualize some of that data. And then you need to obviously align your teams. That's going to be more of a change management question. But you need the foundation of data in order to get started with a lot of these solutions that we're seeing today. And to your comment, maybe even on the chatbot side, I think that a lot of what has been, at least in my opinion, demonstrated is that there's still this idealistic maybe presentation or state,
Mhm.
but the reality of most industrial settings that I have been is that they are still quite far, and this could be months, if not years, before they're able to
Oh,
open up
absolutely.
their data to some of these solutions.
Absolutely. And that's not even to go continue on with your thought, Vlad.
Yes.
That's not even talking about the cybersecurity part
Sure.
of it, right? That's
Yep.
not even talking about whose LLM is it and what does that cybersecurity look like and what does the compliance look like. I don't know about you, but for me, even like my small to medium sized companies, the enterprises that I work with, if they have a cybersecurity team, or a team that has any visual or care about cybersecurity, man, they are kicking back a lot of these thoughts and concepts, and you're going through very rigorous testing and validation. Not even in validated industries, but everyone is scared, concerned, very probably rightfully so of what happens when we deploy this to the plant floor, to the data. We give it access to the raw data. If our raw data is that important as that much IP, how do we go about doing this
Mhm.
and being successful?
Yeah, and for me, look, maybe to continue on a similar train of thought, but to progress the conversation, I think what's interesting is that we're in this early stage where the ROI, quite frankly, is still unclear, right? So I
Yes.
see a lot of solutions that are able to query the data, that are able to present even very nice dashboards as a result of changing OE or other manufacturing metrics. It is still unclear to me how much value that provides versus a more traditional dashboard, right? If it's going to pull some of the data and synthesize some of the reasons as to how you can improve production, I'm still uncertain in a real world environment how accurate those are going to be, how actionable they're going to be, how good they're going to be at retrieving some of the data, for example, from the maintenance manuals to tie that back to operations to allow you to shorten the time it takes to diagnose those problems. So I think that as we continue to apply some of these concepts and as manufacturers get up to speed on data and are able to deploy perhaps
Yeah.
in a proof of concept or R&D environments,
Mhm.
we will get a lot of those answers. But I definitely think that if you're not already thinking about how to better your data, I would say readiness
Yeah.
or maturity,
Mhm.
you will probably be behind on running a lot of those tests and figuring out which one obviously makes sense in different applications for different departments and for different solutions.
Absolutely. No, I would agree. I would agree with all of those. And as we were talking about this, a memory hit me, right? So you start reading a little bit of AI, and the internet is like, oh, this person wants to read all forms of AI news and information and content. And it is very interesting to go watch how some other groups are dealing with AI, right? And like some perhaps earlier adopters are dealing with AI. I had read a couple of articles in which like legal groups, law firms are using AI and not necessarily proofreading,
Mhm.
and like it will hallucinate entire cases, and it will go like footnote and cite entire cases that do not exist.
Mhm.
Ironically, I've read about how people have had lawsuits and other issues thrown out because of that. But I've also read about how a judge is like, "Oh yes, this is a fantastic use of case law that doesn't necessarily exist." So
Yeah.
for me, it is particularly interesting as the direction, and I feel like that is a really good story. It is a really good story to kind of highlight maybe some of the reasons why manufacturing and industrial lags behind, because going and making hallucinations of batches or runs or other things that don't exist is going to cause significantly more problems than we did a poor job proofreading and make fools of ourselves.
Yeah, and look, I would say despite all of that, right, and putting myself maybe in the shoes of an executive or a digital transformation leader, I I can't imagine sitting on the sidelines and basically waiting for all of these things to become more concrete. I believe that you need to be experimenting within your team. You need to be having conversations around the type of data that you're currently collecting, obviously doing an assessment of your existing operations, understanding where you need to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, and then understanding what does it take from an investment standpoint to reach a point where you can R&D pilot some of these solutions. Because again, I think that Dave and I are talking in fairly broad strokes, at least today, but there are very specific solutions that have been proven to work. But until you get that data layer in check, it is impossible to validate. It is impossible to see the ROI for your specific organization. And I simply think that right now is the time where everybody's under the microscope for making sure that the data is correct, is stored correctly, and all of those good things that you've mentioned as well.
Absolutely, no, I'd 100%, and that brings up a point that I want to make sure that we hit. We have seen there are 51 people here, 51 groups here, and pretty much every group that I have seen, most groups that I have seen are using AI. Some groups are using it in addition to go add context, like the Tillit folks that I had mentioned before. Others are using it as like their main highlight of, hey, we have built this and we're chatbotting through everything. There are a couple of groups here who are doing very foundational things, and I've talked to 2 or 3 of them, and like on the JPI side, Dustin and his team, they're doing a fantastic job talking about the foundational work that one needs to do in order to be successful. And the majority of end users that I talk with about wanting to go down the direction of AI have either not done or not completed the foundational work that is necessary in order to be able to go leverage that data. Everyone's like, hey, I want to go leverage this data, which is fantastic. But if you don't have the data and you don't have the contextualization of that data in place, you can't possibly be successful with that. And so the folks on the JPI side are doing Enterprise A. They're one of the very few groups I know only doing Enterprise A, and they're doing a lot of that foundational work. And I was really happy to see who else. I know the Flow folks are doing more foundation. I am seeing for them. I have not seen their presentation. I've been told that they're doing some more of that foundational work, which I really appreciate. And I wanted to go bring that up because last year there were several groups who did some of that foundational work. So Brian Privy of Mott Controls, he led a team with Dustin and Jordy of JPI and Trent, Christopher, and they did a really good job, very much showcasing a lot of that foundational work. And so I was happy to see that there is still foundational work being done, because at the end of the day, we as industry professionals have to meet our end users and their clients where they are. And while some of them may have 10 years of data that's all perfect and contextualized, and they're just looking for a particular solution in order to go visualize and talk about that, the vast majority of them are on the opposite end of the spectrum and have 50-year-old controllers and no network. And the question is, hey, I need to go get to this stage of AI in X number of months or within 3 years. How do I go get there? And we have to do that very foundational levels of work in order to be successful.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. I encourage everyone to be trialing AI on their own, again, like time, if you're looking to learn or maybe to explore some of the solutions that you've seen in the industrial space, just to better understand what are some of the capabilities, but also what are some of the limitations, right? And I think we've talked about this a number of times, but I believe it's important to have firsthand experience as you're maybe pitching some of those solutions, as you're maybe looking to bring something in at your level and your application, and of course your industry, because again, there's a lot of different nuances of what is possible for your specific case, for the specific team, so on and so forth. So I like the fact, as you have mentioned, there's a lot of foundational work.
Yeah.
There's going to always be, I believe, companies that address that side, but you should be, and they are experimenting with AI as well. I would say that, again, maybe to bring this back to ProveIt and give some wrap up thoughts, it is exceptional to see how many different practitioners come to the conference, how excited everyone is to see the solutions and the presentations and actual sessions of something being built and something being deployed,
Yep.
as opposed to just a presentation of a demo or simulated environment. So I definitely appreciate the setup that the team has put together, the opportunity that they have given the vendors, the attendees, and the practitioners of our industry to learn a lot more from a practical sense. And I highly resonate with the message that Walker has meant, that it's all about the customer. It's about especially obviously the challenges of the upper layers, but specifically the people that run the factories, that make sure that the automation is in place, that troubleshoot the problems, and make sure that the plants keep running.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. I think that those are fantastic, fantastic thoughts and words. Just to kind of continue down that part and agree with you, the value of getting a 30-minute segment and having to prove that you can ingest information from an MQTT broker, you can contextualize and simulate that information, and you can extrapolate that information out into a tangible problem. You and I have talked about it for years. Like, there is no better way to go prove and to go have that social proof and to go get customers in front of you that your solution works than doing that in front of a group of 50 vendors and 1,500 people or however many here or here, the vast majority of whom are going to go call you out if you're unable to do that. It is the biggest opportunity for success, and at the end of the day, it might be the biggest opportunity for abject failure within the industry. And I'm here for it, and I'm very excited about it.
Awesome. Really appreciate everybody tuning in.
Yeah.
We will have another broadcast on Friday in the morning,
Yes.
local time. We're going to be talking to Walker, getting some of his thoughts about the conference, about the different solutions. So make sure to be tuning in 2 days. Other than that, if you have any questions for us while we're attending or afterwards about the solutions, about the conference,
Yeah.
about attending next year, I know that the list is already full, so there's going to be no promises on that side. But in any case, reach out to us. Happy to pass the message, happy to answer questions, and we will see you on Friday.
Absolutely. We will see everyone around. Make sure to stay tuned, as Vlad said, for more continued